Hello everyone, I'm going to be breaking down the new Tier 10 Russian heavy tank, the Object 705A's armor here, and going over its weak spots. I have a full written guide as well. If you aren't watching this on that page already, there's a link in the video description below, and also at the end of this video, you'll see a little link pop up on the right side. But anyway, Object 705A has a ton of armor, especially on the front. Wouldn't really expect anything else from a rear turreted Russian heavy tank at tier 10. Basically, the bread and butter of this tank is lots of front armor. With the rear turret, it can also side scrape and angle its tank pretty well while keeping a really good armor profile. Looking at the front here, before I get into things, you'll notice, I have it broken down into green, yellow, orange, and red. All these are based off of effective armor value numbers, which you'll see EA after everything to kind of reference that. But basically what that means is if you're shooting AP and APCR at these values are a little bit higher than what you'll be penetrating with that, because it happens before normalization. So if you're shooting AP or APCR at these areas, think you'll be about 10 to 15 millimeters less, give or take, for the Object 705 here, having to penetrate with AP or APCR. If you shoot heat though, you're gonna have to go through the full effective armor here. Looking frontally though, really the only area that falls beneath or at 244 millimeters effective, as you see yellow in the upper left, is the lower plate. It is large, it's bigger than most other tier 10 heavy tanks lower Glacis, so basically, this is the main weak spot most people are going to be shooting at. If you're in a tier 10 tank and also a tier 9 tank, you're going to have an easy time penetrating this, but you still can bounce, especially if you get close up. You're going to be firing at a steeper angle, so it'll actually, as you get close to the tank, right before you're like touching the front, don't fire at it because it'll be stronger than the upper plate. You're better off shooting into the upper Glacis. The upper Glacis though sits at 350 millimeters effective. Pretty much a no-go unless you're a tier 10 TD throwing out premium rounds, or you get a high roll on a tier 10, say like heavy or something, their premium rounds. Basically, avoid the upper Glacis. The cheeks here, you're just going to ricochet off. It's not even worth. It's like over 500 millimeters effective. It's not even worth writing it in. Moving up, I have something called the driver viewport here. Now this is 60 millimeters at 81 degrees. It's that little thin strip in the center of the upper Glacis right before you get underneath the gun here. That'll ricochet even heat rounds. However, if you are close up to the tank and you don't feel confident in penetrating the upper Glacis, shooting down, basically face hugging, you're going to go through about 50 plus millimeters effective armor shooting into the upper Glacis. Just shoot the little driver viewport area. That's only 60 millimeters thick, so you'll be penetrating really weak armor there if you're face hugging, you're shooting down into it. Now the engine deck itself, looking at it here, it's only 40 millimeters thick as well. You can't see it frontally unless, again, you're very close to the tank. So if you have 121 millimeter or higher gun, so basically 122 millimeter gun or higher, since there are no 121 millimeter guns, you're going to be able to overmatch the engine deck. But actually seeing it's another thing. You have to be really close to this. The cupolas, you'll notice there really aren't any. I have it included here, and I even have arrows in my written guide pointing to them, but really you can't see them at all, nor do you actually want to shoot them because they're 340 millimeters plus effective. Now basically getting to the turret here, I have a couple areas listed. So next to the mantlet, on the higher end, basically the very top here, you'll notice two small orange blocks here. They're about 312 millimeters effective. Moving a little bit lower, you have another really small area that's 339 millimeters effective. So they're not really even weak spots. Even the tier 10 tanks, and actually hitting them's another thing, because if you miss by a little bit and shoot in this area or anywhere else, you're just gonna bounce, or if you hit the mantlet, you're done for. But basically, they're there, but actually hitting them's another thing, unless it's like a last resort. So next to the mantlet, again, once you start getting to the middle and to the low section, next to the mantlet, that's 353 plus millimeters effective. And then even moving out to the side, where sometimes you can punch through, like Russian heavy tanks turret front with just brute force, that's 385 millimeters plus effective armor. So it's basically not able to be penetrated. Now you do have a couple areas right beneath the mantlet, 330-ish millimeters effective, along with a couple little spots around the gun, but hitting the gun area is really difficult. It's just pure luck. But you can shoot beneath the gun, 330 millimeters effective, like I said. So more or less from the front, you see this thing, you can't hit the lower glacis, you're kind of screwed. You have basically the lower glacis, that's the only weak spot. You have a couple little areas on the turret front. You need over 300 millimeters pen to actually get through them. Or, if you see the engine deck, you can overmatch that if you have the right gun. You can HE it, Hess shell it, what have you, or shoot down into the driver viewport. Again, if you're very close, you can actually mitigate the angle on that. So really, frontal armor is insane on this, especially if you can't shoot the lower plate. Moving to the side now, let's get this set up here. The armor does become a little bit weaker, but it's still very strong. Basically, with this tank, with the rear turret, it is kind of built to side scrape, and the side armor here being a little bit weaker, but still pretty good, it helps it out a lot with that. But looking at the side, starting at the side turret, the only area that falls, between 183 and 207 millimeters effective is this one yellow area here, basically the largest one. Everywhere else, as you start going kind of down here, it gets a little bit tougher, but still falls beneath 244. Even the side cupola and a couple other little yellow areas are weak, but really this is the main area you're going to want to hit. So beneath the cupola, not all the way down, not too far left or right. Everywhere else here, once you start getting orange and red, it becomes really tough, and you don't want to actually shoot these areas. You're just going to bounce off. So the side turret armor is surprisingly well, even if it's not angled at you. And you don't get too many shots into a side turret like this with it not angled at all. So basically aim here if you have the chance. It's the weakest area. Moving down, you have a couple areas on the front and rear. The rear cheek, as I'm calling it, is 177 millimeters effective, kind of flat on side if it's not angled at all. So that's easily capable of being penetrated. The front cheek is much tougher, just under 300 millimeters effective, so just avoid shooting this area. And then in between it is the upper side hull. It's 180 millimeters thick, but no angle on it, so even tier 8 tanks can go through, unless you're really unlucky. Just beneath this area, though, I wouldn't actually recommend shooting the upper side hull unless you have to, only because if you hit the turret above it, or you hit the middle side hole here below it, it's kind of tough to punch through. The middle side hole, you have a little bit of a issue here. So it basically has the crazy inversely angled Russian side armor that you find on a lot of high tier tanks, where it angles into the center of the tank, but it looks flat because of space armor. The top little strip here is angled, 30 millimeters angled at 38 degrees, which doesn't affect the armor too much given it's not very thick, and then the rest of it's flat, the space armor in this whole yellow area. Behind this entire area, though, you have 100 millimeters of armor angled at 57 degrees, so it won't bounce any shells. However, heat shells hitting the space armor basically negate it. AP and APCR can punch through, but you're going to have to penetrate 214 to 222 millimeters effective armor. So still pretty difficult, and given the space armor and a bunch of different other variables, it can be really difficult to even pen this, given how you hit it. These effective armor values are one thing, but in practice, you're never going to have a true side shot, and it's going to be angled a little bit, and there's a lot that can go wrong. So avoid shooting the middle. Just beneath it, though, the lower side hole, it's 100 millimeters thick, and it's not angled at all. So shooting in between the space armor and tracks, 100 millimeters effective, plus 20 millimeters if you hit the tracks down here. So it's really weak. So the best area is to shoot, basically the lower side hole here. you know, you can shoot the upper side hull and the rear cheek or the side turret, but you can penetrate the side in a tier 8. You just have to really place your shots, or else you're gonna, you know, definitely bounce a little bit. Getting to the rear of the tank, fortunately for tier 8s, and even, you know, say you're in a stock tier 9, the rear is very weak. Basically, starting off on the top here, this strip that runs across the entire top here, you can penetrate that because it's only 40 millimeters thick. Once you start getting into the center of the rear turret, 116 to 155 millimeters effective, so still really weak. Upper rear hull and lower rear hull are also pretty weak as well. So more or less, just avoid shooting the angled sides of the turret and also the rear cheeks here because they're pretty tough to penetrate. Now, pulling off the overlay here, if you do encounter an Object 705A, say that it's angled, you're going to have some difficulties. Basically, while this tank's angled, it can actually angle. Let's just go with this here to where it's angled a little bit, but not much. The weakest area is still going to be the lower plate. It can get it pretty strong, but tier 10s can still penetrate it. If you use premium, you can still penetrate it really well as well. But basically, your best area to aim is still here, because having to go through the track and the side armor being 100 millimeters thick, unless it's beneath kind of a ricochet or a really high angle, it's going to be tougher to penetrate this. And more or less, shoot the lower plate. You can even shoot beneath the gun still if you have a really high penetrating round. Other tanks, you're kind of screwed. More or less, the lower plate, it's not going to reach over 300 millimeters effective. It can get close to it sometimes, but as it angles even heavily, you'll notice that the frontal cheek here, that starts getting a little weaker. You know, about 280 millimeters effective, I believe. The lower plate you're not going to want to shoot, but outside of shooting here and whatever turret weak spots, if you can call them that, you want to use, you're going to want to shoot right above the tracks but below the side space armor. If you start shooting the tracks, given that, you know, the angle of hitting a track matters a lot, oftentimes your shell will be absorbed given the sheer thickness that has to travel through the track armor. So you're going to want to hit any areas not covered by space armor, or, you know, if it's heavily angled, shoot this area too. But if you're in a tier 8, tier 9 tank without a ton of penetration, you're not going to have many options, because once this thing angles, it's really tough for tier 10s to deal with it unless they've really thread the needle and hit their shots where they need to. Where if you're in a tier 8 or tier 9, track the thing, run away, HE it, something like that. Or, you know, track it, have some help, and then push past it and start shooting it in the side or the rear. But this tank is very tough to deal with, the 705A. Hopefully this video helped you out a bit. Again, I do have a written guide that'll be popping up here in a second, and also it's in the video description, a link for it. Feel free to check that out. It basically points out each specific area a little bit better and goes into a little bit more depth as far as the raw armor values. But otherwise, you know, thanks for watching this video. Hopefully if you come across the 705A here, you'll at least know where you stand a chance against it, or if you should just run away. I feel really bad for like a tier 8 light coming across this thing, because you don't really have that many options unless you're shooting the rear or specific spots in the side, if it lets you shoot it in the side. But anyway, thank you again for watching. Have a very nice day. See you around another video sometime soon.